Oof, man, it's like a supernova. For me, yeah, it is. Man. That's circled for a while. Or how about when you're looking down the road and the car passes right in front of you and it reflects the sunlight right into your retina? Yeah, I've done that a few times too. All right, now why are we starting so late? We're starting late because I had to update my computer and it didn't work right and I had to reboot it, and here we are. And so just let people know who want to jump in on the study. Today was one of those days where I did not have enough time to even prep a study. I didn't. And had to get up, hit the floor running, because there were certain things I had to take care of. Let's just leave it at that. And all day and stuff, and then the radio show, and then I was exhausted, took a nap, and because I was just tired to get enough sleep, and whine. So here we are. So what are we going to do instead of Philippians? What we're going to do is open up the Q&A. If you got any questions, just ask questions, and I'll go through, try and answer. Hey, Jamie Canas, how are you doing? And I'll try and see if we can answer the questions. And so I was going to say something else. What was it? It was really important. I can't remember. James Sanborn, how are you? Tracy, not a Nephilim. Very good. All right.
I'm going to change that.
So you got in. You're working. Look at that.
Yeah, I just did that.
Okay, that's a joke because about a month ago we were talking about Nephilim, and she has a rare blood type. But I said, "Oh, it's a Nephilim blood type," and so we're joking. And then she was back in the kitchen there from this room, and she had a question like 10, 15 minutes later. I go, "Yes, a Nephilim in the back," and so it just kind of took, and we've been having fun with it. So also, there's not as many people here tonight as normally, which happens sometimes, so no big deal. So if you guys have comments or questions in the text, you can ask. And often questions get me going, teaching something. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. You want to ask anything? My wife knows everything, so she wouldn't be asking me anything. That's why she corrects me all the time about everything, all the time, everything, always, because she knows everything. You have a question? Okay. I didn't say it. I did not say it. Well, those are your questions?
No. It's 3 different
questions?
Versions
of
Matthew 17, 19 through 20.
Matthew 17.
19 through 21.
Matthew 17, 19 through 21.
Something's missing.
Something's missing? Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean verse 21? Yeah. Why? Okay.
That's Jesus speaking. Why would they take? Seems like that's important.
All right. Where in the text can we find God can only gift salvation? Well, hold on, Jim. We're going to do this over here. So why is Matthew 17, 21 not in all Bible translations? All right. Because when Matthew was copied, it was originally written, I should say, it was perfect. And whatever was really in it was in it, obviously. When it gets copied, a lot of what people don't get is that, okay, good. By saying this, I'm opening up a small can of worms. The copying of the Bible is not perfect, period. It's not perfect. Now, people could take this out of context and say, well, Matt Slick says that the Bible's not perfect. That's not what I'm saying. So when the Gospel of Matthew was copied, or was written, it's pure and perfect, everything's great. When they would copy it, they probably copied it perfectly the first time. But it's a big book, and there's a lot of stuff in it. So scribes at different centuries would be copying. So in the 1st century, this was written. And then in the 60s, Nero was persecuting the Christians. In 70 AD, Rome came down to destroy Jerusalem. Rome considered Christianity a sect of Judaism, so it tolerated it. Rome had something called Caesaropapism, which is emperor worship. So the Christians would not worship emperor, neither would the Jews, and the Romans permitted this. But when it hit the fan, in 70 AD, the Jews and the Christians scattered. It's called a diaspora. the dispersion. So during this first 100-ish years-ish, the Christians were running all over the place, and copying manuscripts was not a very common thing all over the place. Of course, they're going to make copies. And if Matthew was written in the year 50, for example, you know, they're going to copy it pretty quickly because they're going to send stuff out in different places. All right, so there's these factors and these variables and how this works. So what do you do when, like, for example, we'll get into some other stuff here. The word the in English is THE. In Spanish, it's EL. In Greek, it's the letter O with a comma over it. It's called a rough breathing mark. We have the H sound in English. They don't have an H character. So when they say ha, it's an O with a little swiggle over the top, called a rough breathing mark. And then they have the reverse one, which is silent breathing mark. There's no sound. They just put it there. Because anyway, all right. So what do you do, for example, when you're coming to a line of codex, a scribe who is not well fed, might be tired, living in a monastery, and is copying word for word, and he's copying letter by letter, letter by letter, letter by letter, and he's going on letter by letter, letter by letter, letter by letter. And he's going on. At the end of the line, for example, is the ha, the word the. And he's looking at it, and he could be fading. And they figured this kind of thing happened. And he would just look, and he knows the word the is there, and he goes to write, and he looks back up, and he looks at the next line, because it's the whatever it is, and he skips the word the, and he continues. And things like that happen. Sometimes what they would do is they would see a word. Oh, there's all kinds of variables. They would see a word, and it might be the last word on a line, and they would see that word, or they would see the word on one line, and it might give the same word on another line, and they would skip a line. So these varying kinds of copyist errors would occur. Sometimes the parchment or the vellum, parchment is papyrus, plant stripped, laid like this, and like this, like this, like this. And vellum is the hide of an animal, and they would scrape it and write on it. Well, for example, in a papyrus, you could have a document where the word the, ha, just flakes off. And so he's copying it. Maybe it's a copy that's the third generation from that one over there, and the word the just isn't there, so he doesn't put it there. You know, so there's actually a list of I did an article on this. There's a list of the kind of copyist errors there are. Ditography or something copied twice, and various things. Okay, well, anyway, now the dispersion caused the Jews, mainly the Christians, spread out all over the Mediterranean area, and they would take copies of these manuscripts, and they would put them in different. They would take them with them. Now I could go upstairs and get my wine goblet. I have an actual wine goblet from 330 BC, southern Italy, plus or minus 10 years. I go, here it is. I've used it for years, for many years. I had it for almost 40 anyway. And wine goblet. So these things are the ways that they would put. It used to be like Ziploc bags. They put them in these jars, these wine goblets, but not just, I would drink for wine. But they have these jars with lids, and they store things in there because you could put it into a satchel on a donkey and transport it. It'd be pretty safe. So things like that. Okay. Now, let's just say hypothetically. I know I'm giving you a lot more information because it really helps in the long run. Let's just say 10 copies of Matthew are written, and let's just say. This isn't accurate, but let's just say, this is an illustration, that the two copies were made before the year 100, 2 more copies were made by the year 200, 2 more copies by the year 300, 2 more 400, 2 more 500. Let's just say that. So now that we have 10 copies, and the original it's gone someplace. We have copies. And 1 copy's over there, 1 copy's over there. We have 10 copies, and they're different places. And they're written over a 500-year period, roughly, a 400 or 500-year period. All right. So When you copy something, say the first, if you found the copy made in the 500s, that's all you had, it's a very accurately transmitted document. But what do you do when you find something in from the 400s? It's even earlier. Well, the implication is that it's more accurate than the one after it because there's less time for a scribal error. And it's usually what they call scribal errors, or a little flake of a letter comes off or something like that. And just so you know, I've read the people who know this stuff, they say that all the combined documents are 99.85% textually identical in all the documents. It's incredibly well preserved. But we have these things like this. Okay, so the King James, for example, was translated with 5th century documents. Now, Erasmus got the documents together that he had and developed what's called the Textus Receptus. And that's what the King James is. And it was fine. Then they found documents like from the 300s and the 200s. And how do they know that? The pots that they're in, dating methods, etc. 200s, right? And one from the 200s doesn't have this verse in it.
Really?
That kind of a thing. I'm not saying it's a 200s, but I'm saying it's like that.
It's an important verse, I think.
Well, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about this because why is that in there? We'll talk about it.
Okay.
Because we're going to go to Mark 16, 9 through 11 through 21. We'll go through there in a little bit because that's the big one. That's the big issue. So the earlier the manuscripts are, generally speaking, the more accurate it's going to be. It's not like you got 8,000 errors in 100 years. It's not like that. Very few, but here's an issue. So early manuscripts don't contain that verse. So the newer Bibles are translated from more ancient documents. So the newer Bibles theoretically don't have this verse in it because it's more accurate from the original. Now on my NASB, it has the verse here, but it's in brackets with a note. Not the early manuscripts not contain this verse. MSS is the note. It's manuscript. So the implication is that the earlier you go back, the more accurate it is. It doesn't mean it's absolutely true all the time, because you could have an error creep in at the year 200 that a copyist made the word "the" twice, and then it gets copied. But something early, but later it would only have. How does it work? Reverse it. Anyway, I forget. I'm tired. My brain's tired. So just because it's early doesn't mean that it's always going to be correct every time, because different locations can have different errors at different times. But generally speaking, the rule is earlier the better, and they go with that as a rule of thumb because it does make sense. Now, why would something like to be in here? Probably because a scribe wrote it in the margin. A scribe who'd studied other documents might think that belongs in there. Why isn't it in there? He might have put that in there as a note on a margin in a codex. And then a later scribe, 100 years later, would copy that marginal note and say, oh, that's supposed to be in there, and insert it. So as time goes on, there's more opportunity for errors to be inserted into the text. All right, so now in line of that, let's go to Mark 16, starting at verse 9. I'll show you something. Because Mark 16, 9 through 20 is not found in most of the ancient manuscripts. And my note here says later manuscripts add verses 9 through 20. So let's talk about this a little bit, and I'll show you something. So let's just go to verse 7. And we're going to read 7 and 8, and let's assume that 8 is the final verse of the original manuscript, of the original document. For a moment. And notice the abrupt ending. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you'll see him, just as he has told you. They went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had gripped them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. We're done. So now the older manuscripts, that's how it ends. And it's kind of an abrupt ending. It's like, well, wait a minute. And so later manuscripts have these 11 verses in it. But just so you know, there's another ending to Mark. And people don't know this. We're going to talk about this. A few late manuscripts and versions contain this paragraph, usually after verse 8. A few have it at the end of the whole note's not there. But it's talking about what I'm going to read you now is another ending that goes after verse 8. And that is, and they promptly reported all these instructions to Peter and his companions. And after that, Jesus himself went out through them from east to west, sent out through them from east to west, a sacred imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. Oh, you can turn that down. It's always a good one. And so you can see there's yet another ending I've heard. But the thing is, what it looks like, a codex is just, pages, right? So you have a page in a book, right? Well, what if it's called a codex? What if the final page, which had the ending of Mark, let's say there was more to it, and it fell off, it was lost. Who knows? Let's just say something happened to it, or a rodent ate it because it was opened and on that page. We don't know. It could be all kinds of stuff. But then what do you do? Well, it looks like some scribes tried to finish up the ending of Mark, because if it ends at verse 8, it's abrupt. It doesn't quite fit. So there's theories about this. So when we go to what most Bibles have, 9 through 20, I'm going to read it. Now, after he had risen early in the first day of the week, he first appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. Okay, no problem. She went and reported to those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. Verse 11, when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they refused to believe. Verse 12, after that, he, that's Jesus, appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking along on the way to the country. Now it says he appeared in a different form. That's a problem. Because Jesus was raised in the same body he died in a glorified body. And that's how he's going to be forever. So it does not make sense to say he appeared in a different form. That does not work. Plus, and I know about this because of the baptismal regenerationists who like to add works to salvation. And they say, go to verse 16, he who has believed and has been baptized shall be saved. They say, see, they baptized to be saved. Now, let's just talk about this. We'll get back to the textual critical issue. He who believes and has been baptized shall be saved. It says, see, baptism is part of salvation. It doesn't say that. He who's believed and has been baptized shall be saved. But it also is true that he who believes and goes to church, reads the Bible, will be saved. Because notice what it says, but he who has disbelieved shall be condemned. It doesn't say he who does not get baptized. If baptism is necessary and is part of the salvation process, then why is it not also negated here as a possibility? So these are 2 textual things with it in English that are problematic. And there's a third thing. In these 11 verses, there's 17 new words that suddenly appear right there in 11 verses. 17 words occur that are not in the entire Gospel of Mark. So it's all of a sudden 17 new words. And I read it. I don't have the skill to be able to affirm this, but one paragraph that I read in a book about this is 17 non-Markan words appear and used in a non-Markan sense. That's what so it appears that it's not original, and it appears, there's Charlie on the screen, there we go. It appears that what it is a scribe from memory tried to fill in the ending. And it might have been that he wrote another page because of the abruptness of the ending of Mark at verse 8. And so some scribes made it later go, well, this belongs in there. And then it got added in. So there are 3 of these issues in the New Testament that are significant. This is one of them. The other one is in John chapter 8 with the woman caught in adultery. Now, I will never preach out of Mark, the ending of Mark. I don't consider it to be authentic. That's just my opinion. And if someone else does, I'm not going to worry about it. But I won't preach out of it. So that is one thing. And the woman caught in adultery is in different places in different manuscripts. So it's the same thing that's in different places in different manuscripts. So it looks like it was, it's a wonderful story. I mean, it's so characteristic of how Jesus would be. So was it something later on added out of a tradition and it was put in, or what? We don't know. And so it appears a different thing. So that's an issue. I probably would preach out of that text. Probably would. Then the third one is, if you go to 1 John 5:7, it's called the Comma Johanneum. 1 John 5:7. Come on. All right, let's see. Last one, there's a Apollinarian. All right. Now, what it says in my Bible, the NASB, which is translated with earlier manuscripts in the King James, it says in verse 7, for there are 3 that testify. That's verse 7. In the King James, it says, for there are 3 that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost, and these 3 are one. So that's one of the issues. And these 3 areas are the big areas in the text of the entire New Testament. So when I talk about this, I have to always tell people, I don't believe the Bible's corrupted, but the fact is there are textual errors in it. It's a fact. I could go up or go outside my garage and get, if you guys want later, I can get a Greek New Testament and I can show it to you and show you it's called a textual apparatus. And what it is all the manuscripts in the Greek that have been unearthed over there are put together. And these guys who, their glasses are really thick like this, and they all and they study this stuff, and they're really super smart. They get together and talk about this stuff, and they're experts. And then they put these trees together, manuscript trees, and they'll say this one has this more reliability. It seems that this and that, and there are no places except for the ending of Mark where anything doctrinally might be affected. Mark's the only issue, which 17 new words appear in 11 verses, plus verse 12 has a problem. Jesus appeared in a different form. I just don't go with it. And I tell people, ouch. I tell people who use that, baptism regenerationists, say baptism is necessary for salvation. I say, you don't want to go there. And then it looks like I'm attacking God's word. Oh, it doesn't think what you want. So you say it's no good. That's not what I'm doing. It takes a long time to explain it, which is why I'm doing this. What's that?
So they don't hear that.
But they don't want to hear that either. Right. So there's a movement within the King James community, KJVO, King James only. See, the modern translations are pagan because they take out these verses that Jesus said, and like, you just don't know what you're talking about. And so there are problems in the King James as well. Romans 5:18, Titus 2:13, some stuff. So anyway, I can't tell you exactly why that verse in Matthew 17 doesn't occur, what the reason it doesn't occur, but it's not found in the oldest manuscripts. So it looks like it might have been an addition, well, it had to be, by a scribe remembering and doing things. And you got to understand, just because these guys were scribes doesn't mean that they're perfect. They're human. and they had their assumptions, and sometimes they would do things by memory. And I've done this too. When I've written a paragraph that's perfect, it's perfect. Give it to my wife, and she finds an error within 5 seconds. And we have a way. That's why I use Grammarly. I'll write something like I released an article a couple of days ago, and I read through it was perfect. I put it in Grammarly, and it found a word. What I was doing was reading and inserting a word in my mind that wasn't in the text. It went to the store. To went, I just said it went to the store, but to wasn't there, and Grammarly caught it. So that kind of a thing happens, and the scribes would do the same kind of a thing, because they would sit there and they would they would just work on this for hours and months and months.
I mean, Jesus is speaking.
Yeah.
It seems like they'd be really careful about that.
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't matter who's copying.
Yeah. That's right. So these monasteries, it's another place. These monasteries all over the place would pop up when Christianity became legal, and they would get these manuscripts. One guy, I forgot his name, what year it was. I think it was in the 1800s, but I can't remember. And he was going through one of these old monasteries in Podunk mountain range of eastern whatever it was over in Europe someplace. And he's walking down a hallway, and he glances down a hall, and he sees some monks shoveling papers into a furnace. And he keeps walking. He goes, and he walks back, and he takes a look, and he goes, "Stop!" He was trained, and he knew that they were valuable, and they had been using them to fuel fires for weeks. They had so many manuscripts, and there were some great discoveries in what they found. Monasteries. In fact, I don't know if you guys ever heard of this one. There was this mechanic. He was driving down a road really late one night, and a storm and everything. He was going from one state to another state, and he took a detour. He ends up at the monastery, and so what happened was he was driving, and car breaks down, but he's got tools in the car, and so he's looking out the window, and the windshield wipers, the rain and the lightning, and he sees a little kind of a flickering kind of a window light, and he just gets out of his car, he runs down, and he's drenched instantly, and he runs up to this it's a monastery, and he clanks on the door, and then after about a minute, it opens up, and this hooded guy, a monk dude, is standing there. I mean, like that, he goes, "Yes." And the guy goes, "My car." And he explained the whole situation. The guy goes, "Oh, well, come on in. Ain't no problem." And so he walks in to the monastery. He's drenched. And so a bunch of monks are around him, and they're having a great time because they don't get visitors very often. And because they copy manuscripts, they make wine, they fix Bibles, they do all this kind of stuff, make monk robes. And he's he's drenched. So they get a bunch of monks, and they go out and they push his car in. And they push it in, and they're wet the whole bit, and so they give him a monk's robe to wear, and he's loving it. This is great. There's no electricity, but he doesn't care. They have candles and the whole bit, and there's people singing, "Oh," and so he's liking this, liking that, and time to go to bed. And so finally, they take him to this small room. It's not very big. It's like 8 feet by 10 feet kind of a thing. It's not very big. Maybe it's a little bit less, with a single window, and it's outside, so it's scary stuff like a vampire is going to walk outside, that kind of thing. And so, so they said, "Is there anything you want before you retire?" And he said, "Well, no." And they looked at him and they said, "What?" He goes, "It's okay." He goes, "No, really, what is it? Because, we don't get many visitors. We want to help you out. What is it? What is it?" "No, it's all right." He goes, "No, please, just tell us. What do you need? We'll be glad to help." He goes, "Well, do you have, by any chance, like a dead bug of any kind? And I need some chicken wire, preferably. But if you don't have chicken wire, any spool of thread will do fine. I'll need a mirror and a small ladder." And the monks are staring at this guy like, "What?" Because the monitors make Bible copies, and they're like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And "What's it for?" He goes, "Well, it's a family secret thing. It's embarrassing. I can't." So they just kind of turn away and walk, and they go get these things. It takes them like 20 minutes. They find all the stuff, and they give it to him, and he opens the door a little bit. "Thank you." Closes the door. They're all staring at the door. What's going on? So they go about their business, and they get up in the morning because he's going to work on his car. He's got the tools in the car. So he gets up and he's working underneath the car the whole day, and it's a bad problem. He's going to fix it, but just ran out of light. Not quite enough light to get it done. One more night in the monastery. So all the monks are staring at him. And time to go to bed again. They feed him the whole bit. And they said, anything we can get for you before you retire? He says, well, he goes, go ahead. What do you need? Do you have any cooking oil? And you wouldn't have a compass, would you? Because it's cooking oil and a compass. And you don't have radios, so that's not going to work. So I was thinking, some shoelaces would be great, and a lump of cotton, maybe some oil or something. And they just say, okay. And they don't even bother asking what they're for, because she's obviously embarrassed, and they just walk off. And they come back and they, knock on the door. He opens up just 6 inches, and they slip all the stuff in there. And he closes the door immediately. And they're like, oh man, what are these things for? Next morning, he gets up and he's working on his car, right? And everybody's staring at him. And an hour into it, it's done. Turns it on, it's ready to go. And they're really good guys. And what they do is they said, hey, great, glad you're here. You're always welcome back. Here's a basket of fruit. Here's a fresh Bible. And we like the monk's robe, so we gave you a monk's robe and the whole bit. And what we got, the guy's in the car. And he goes, okay, well, I got to go. He goes, no, you can't go. You've got to tell us what these things are for. I go, well, why? But because Brother Thomas over here is in a vow of silence for 20 years. When we said what you wanted, he went, what? And and so he ruined his vow of silence. And then look at the Nathaniel over here. He's got a bandage on his arm because he was up all night thinking about this, and people are gossiping. Now we're having to confessing our sins to one another. You've destroyed the entire thing. We're thinking that we should be thinking now, and you've got to tell us what these things are for. And so he's in there, the car's idling. He looks around. Everybody's bedraggled, bags under their eyes, and the head monk's right next to him. And and he goes, "You got to tell us. You destroyed the whole monastery." And he goes, "Well, it's embarrassing." And he says, "Well, you got to tell us, please." He goes, "Well, if I do, you promise you won't tell anybody, And he goes, "Yeah, we won't tell anybody." And to this day, he kept that promise. Hit. Wow.
Oh boy.
You live with this.
So the great thing about this joke is I need a parabolic mirror. If you have a laser, that would be good, but I don't think I'd have a laser here. But I definitely need a tarp, a swing set, a rope, and a good mirror. And you have any grease? And so you just make up whatever you can. So I was at a youth group thing. You just make it up. It's stupid, unrelated things. I think Neek once said, a dead cricket and a broken radio. Yeah, we need to, And so we were I'll get back to the study here in a sec. So I was at Magic Mountain in Southern California with youth group thing, and we had this ride where it's just people transport, just coming down really slow. There's nothing. It was just get down to the top of the hill, the bottom of the hill. And so I had a bunch of kids around me because I'm the chaperone guy and the whole bit. And so I started telling this joke, and pretty soon everybody is listening to the joke in the entire place. They're listening, right? And I am making it good. And I'm watching how much further we've got before we get down, it's coming up, like the door's going to open up. So I time it so that it's right there, before the doors open up, a couple seconds. And at one point, some kid with his dad goes, "What's it for, Dad?" He goes, "I don't know. Let's find out." And it actually happened on this little transport, right? So I time it, and to this day, he kept his promise. And then the doors go, and then people are going, oh man. And they're all walking out, right? And then I thought about it when I was driving out later. The people getting in line, the doors open up, everybody's going, oh man. Get on that. I don't want to get on that thing. So
What happened in there?
what happened in there? All right. That was a long way coming. It's with that joke. I told that joke to a couple of guys that were in the military once. I was helping them out, and we're in Mountain Home, and I told it to him, and he's in the back seat. And he goes, after I did this, he pauses for like 5 seconds. He says, now I have to kill you. So you liked it.
Taco Bell's the only place you can get gas for $1.39.
Taco Bell's the only place you get gas for $1.39. Okay. I shared it to you, June, and measured. Okay. All right. So that was fun. I had to do that because we're talking about monasteries, and it occurred to me with the copy, I'm just going to weave it right in. So after a while, I can see you guys are going, wait a minute. This is not part of this is the joke coming up. So it took a bit. Okay.
Any books that they found later they uncovered?
New? No.
After everything was written, hey, look what we found.
Nope. But
like earlier versions, they had later versions.
Yeah, of course. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, earlier versions, earlier manuscripts.
Yeah.
And then later manuscripts. And sometimes they have just fragments of something. It might be like you took a whole page and you tore out this one part, and that's it. And it's a fragment. I think it's called a fragment. And so it'll have a certain text. They'll say, oh, that's John 12, verses, part of this verse, part of that verse. And so it goes from things like that to full-blown, pages and pages and pages copied and stuff like that. So I read one article where they said there's a fragment that is the Gospel of John, and they think maybe it might be actually a piece of the original gospel, but they can't prove it. They say it's of that time and of that age, that it's possible. It's all they could say. It's possible because it was written, and they're going to preserve the Gospel of John. It was written probably 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. That's the range of the thing. So if it was written in let's say the year 80 AD by John, who's exiled, well, then it's going to last 50, 70, 100 years. In fact, you see that bookshelf right there? That book, the bottom bookshelf on the left, is printed in 1722. And a smaller one with a duct tape on it that someone messed up, that's printed 1709. So those are real books. And books, papyri, they last a long time. So how would you know if a fragment was original? You don't. But it's that old, it's possible that it could be. They just say it's possible, but they don't go any further than that. So that's the issue with that. And there are books that discuss this. And this is not my forte, just read about it, because I do apologetics. It rarely ever comes up. But that's why you'll have variations in the text like that. And I gave you the three important ones. And this line right there in Matthew 17, 21, it's just not in a lot of the older manuscripts. And there's several of these in the New Testament. Like I think 3, 4, 5, something like that. And I think one of them is, let's see, the ending of Matthew 24. Or is it Luke 17? There's another one like that. Let's see. Come on. Let's see. No, it's going to be in Luke 17. Yeah, Luke 17:36. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other will be left. Now we could talk about that because we know from Matthew 24:36, where it talks about 2 men in the field, one is taken, one is left, that whole thing, because it says of that day nor the hour. Well, in Matthew, there are no textual variants here. but it says 2 men will be in the field, one is left, will be taken, one is left. In Matthew 24:41, it says 2 women will be, okay? In verse 40, 2 men. So in Luke 17, it's obviously a parallel between Matthew 24 and Luke 17. They're obviously a parallel. And so it looks like a scribe just added it in because he's doing it from memory. And he goes, and he could have made a note. That's one of the things I remember reading is that it had these margin areas. He could have written it as a note to himself. Another thing is that here's another issue about the manuscripts. I read this years and years ago. So let's say a monk, number one, copies a chapter to be used in a teaching thing. They didn't have Xerox. They didn't have phones. They would copy just to say a chapter, or what we call a chapter. That wasn't added till later. They'd copy a pericope. And they might have a half-inch margin on the right. In fact, in that book, you can actually see handwriting from 200 years ago. It's on the margins of some of the pages. And it's written in German. It's a German Jewish history book. And it's got pictures and stuff, hand-drawn, but printed, of course. But anyway, so let's just say then that a monk is, or a scribe, is copying 2 pages, because he could teach out of these 2 pages. Pages might be this big, like this, pretty, relatively small. And he's copying, and he's doing this because they're going to teach on it, or they need a set to go teach over here. Well, let's just say, well, okay, it's just part of this manuscript. So he's copying, he's hurrying it through, and he makes a little error, and he writes a little correction in there in the script, in the margin. And because it's not considered a primary one for that level of expertise and the sacred level, so to speak, even though it is, but they'll use it for teaching in other areas. Or if they made a scribal error, he goes, oh, I just wrote the word twice, or I forgot these 2 words because I went to this left line. And then they'll do something, make a marginal note that I remember reading. Then they would use it as a teaching text, but not necessarily a preaching text. They had a differentiation, even though you could preach out of it, but you get my point. And so they would keep these around for decades, and they would know what was going on. Well, what happens when the government changes and you better run? And these things are left behind. Now someone else comes up 100 years later. What do we do with this? What is it? And so they would add this in. And so these little things like this would creep in. So people, they say, well, that proves the Bible's not trustworthy. And I say, no, it doesn't. It doesn't prove the Bible's not trustworthy. What it proves is it was actually written a long time ago and really was copied by real people all over the place. And just as if, you would expect if it really was ancient. And so you can look at it that way and say, of course. Let's just say hypothetically, let's just say that every single copy is absolutely identical in every way. Well, then people would say, how can it be accurate they're going to complain. Oh, somebody got together and they put everything together and they made everything perfect. So actually, when I look at this, I started studying it years ago and I stopped because I just had enough answers and I was done. I went, this stuff really was written back then. It really was copied by real guys. I don't think any women were copyists that I'm aware of. All monks were males and stuff like that. It might have been that women did some in history, who knows? But copied by real guys in real places, real time, who were really tired, who made mistakes, and they could trace them. So when you have this manuscript over here, identical to that manuscript over here, and this one, and you have another one discovered 100 years earlier than these two, and they both carry an error, a scribal error, and this one doesn't. And they compare it. They go, oh, it looks like these came from this one, and a scribal error, and then it was moved over, and then the copying from this tree, this one becomes its own tree, and you have that error that is in here. Oh, so now we know exactly what happened. So here's another question. So if the original was here, and it was copied, 2 copies, it was one area, and there was a slight error, like the word ha is missing. And then from here on out, let's say 10 copies are made. So they have ha in the original plus 10 copies. That's 11 total with the copying error. Now, how many errors is that? Is it 10 plus 1, or is it 1? That's just repeated. And so sometimes critics of the Bible go, see, it has 11 errors in it. And they will use the other method that a single error copied 100 times is 100 errors. And you go, no, it's not. Yeah. I said, nope. That's why when they get back, they look at the Bible, New Testament's like something like 99 point. I think the lowest I've ever heard is 99.85% textually identical, pure of all the manuscripts combined. Yeah, it is amazing.
I mean, yeah, it's taught the meaning is there.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything that wants to be
Right.
get out of it.
Plus, people say, well, how do you know what the language really means from that ancient times? And let me tell you, I could open up my phone, or I can go onto Kindle. I can get a Greek, if I could find it. Sometimes I was prepped for this particular question, and read a paragraph. And they have these rules, like Sharp's Granville rule, which occurs in Titus 2:13, and it's a rule of how many certain words of a certain construction occur in a pattern. Always it means this. All these two things always refer to this one bang bang, and it's universal. Well, they know this so stinking well that I mean, it is so precise. When I took Greek, for example, and it's been, I graduated in 91, so I haven't studied it since. But they would do things like the genitive of means when it's next to predicate nominative, always is blah, blah, blah. And you take the dative and then you translate it this way. They have these rules like this, and it gets very specific because they know it that well. So then translating from there to English is very easy. And the problem is, let's continue with this a little bit, is that sometimes translating Greek to English doesn't work very well. And sometimes it does. Because as any language, like Nick speaks French, Spanish, my daughter speaks Japanese. Like in English, we have possessive. That's Matt's Bible, the apostrophe S. They don't have that in Spanish. They don't have it in French. A possessive contraction. They say of something. So, esta casa es de David. This house is of David. This is David's house. That's how you'd say it. And so in French, it'd be, how do you say, this is David's house? Okay, say it in French. You see? So de, David, and then de, and the de is of in both languages. So, well, in Greek, there is no of, a single word of. It becomes part of the noun. And so it's like the OF is put on the word, where not two words, it's like house of, HOUSEOV, OF would be how they do it. And it becomes, so then house at would be HOUSEAT. It's all considered one word. Each one is one word. So the words do this. So when you translate, translation, incidentally, is written to written. Spoken to spoken is interpret. That's just a little bit of trivia. So when they translate different ways. So, for example, in Spanish, to say I'm hungry, you say literally I have hunger. Yo, which is I, tengo, which is I have, hambre, which is hunger. Yo tengo hambre. I have hunger. That's what you say. But we don't talk like that. So you just say, I'm hungry. We contract them. And so what do you do when you translate? How literal do you want to translate the original from this? Well, a literal translation of that would be I have hunger, right? But we don't talk like that. So we would say, it was called the equivalent translation is I'm hungry. And it's correct. But which is correct? The I'm hungry is not correct if you're going for literal translation. And then the I have hungry would not be correct if you're going for a dynamic translation or an equivalent. Depends on the intention. So they can actually translate very well now. Okay, makes sense? All right. I get a lot of information there, I know. Okay, anybody on the line they want to say anything? Anybody have any questions?
It's not a question, it's just where the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Book of Isaiah.
Oh, very good. She actually listened to me. So, because I haven't talked about that for a long time. So the ancient, you want to see it? We could get you up in the Qumran cave, but you would have to have 2 or 3 guys helping you up. Yeah. Yes, you could. We could help you. We could do it. 1 on each arm, and I'd on your butt. Push it, because it's uphill. I've actually been inside of Qumran Cave 1, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and it's up a semi-steep. It's like 20-degree grade, and the rocks are sharp. If you slip and fall, you can get sliced. Yeah. And so anyway, yeah. So what was I going to talk about? Oh yeah. So when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Isaiah, the oldest manuscript of Isaiah, was copied in the 900s. Just say 900 AD. It's not exactly accurate, but 900 something. So 900s. When they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, there was a copy of Isaiah, and they dated it to 100 BC. That's 1,000-year difference. 1,000 years, 100 BC to 900 AD, 1,000 years. The critics immediately said, we're going to prove to you how corrupt the Bible is by this. Now we have the manuscript, 1,000-year difference. We're going to show you how many corruptions have crept in all that time. And long story short, the critics shut up. There were a few slight, very minor things, and they didn't even say something like that. Yeah. So I have been, I got to brag, it's totally bragging, in Qumran Cave 1. And Eric Johnson's going to set up a thing for March, it looks like February, March of next year, to go to Israel.
The trip that got canceled is going to be back on.
We'll be back on.
Do we have to be vaccinated?
You don't have to be vaccinated, because I won't go if you have to be vaccinated. Israel got rid of it. So where is the text? Can we find that God can only gift salvation? That God's the only one who can give salvation, because he's the author of salvation. Salvation means to be delivered from the wrath of God, to be saved from it. So since God is the only one who can fulfill the law and meet the requirements through the person of Christ, and he's the one who gives you salvation. And the free gift of God is eternal life. And that's what it says in Romans 6:23. The free gift of God is eternal life. It doesn't say eternal life is given by anybody else. Okay? So it's a nice little interesting thing on text. I'm not very knowledgeable on it. There are people a lot more knowledgeable, and they can give a lot more details. But I like to give the 2,000-foot version looking down. You see the overall. That's quite sufficient. See more about this at Mona's Scriptures Regarding Total Inability of Man. Right. That's right. Any other questions? So in the chat room, if you guys want to answer it. And like I said, the reason we're not doing the Bible study tonight is because I didn't have time to study. It was one of those days. Didn't have time to prep it. What? I didn't have time to make sandwiches. You did. You had time to make sandwiches. What? She gave me a frowny face. All right. Yeah, we do have a prayer team. That's right. Why did the Masoretic scribe substitute Adonai for Yahweh? Okay. Substitute Adonai instead of for Yahweh. So In Exodus 20, do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. In Exodus 3:14 and 15, God is talking to Moses, who's at the burning bush. And Moses says, what am I going to tell him is your name? He says, I am that I am. I am is where we get Yahweh. It's called a tetragrammaton. Tetra, four, tetragrammaton. Tetragramma, 4 letters. Yod He Vav He in Hebrew. How do you pronounce that? That's the question. And when you do Hebrew, you realize Hebrew is done from right to left. And so they only have, original Hebrew only had consonants, not vowels. So the pronunciation is lost because the vowels weren't written in there. Furthermore, they didn't include spaces. And so someone who was reading the text would just know, because the scribes, very few people would do this, are experts, they would just know. Well, now when they're reading the text, now they could write it, they copy it, that's okay, but do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. They were so serious about this that they wouldn't even pronounce his name with a fear of mispronouncing it and using it in vain. So what they did was they substituted Adonai, Lord. And it would just substitute that. And it was just a way of showing respect. So when translators translate, they do the same thing into English. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D is Yod He Vav He, YHWH, Yahweh, Jehovah. But when it's capital L, small O-R-D, it's just the equivalent Lord, Adonai, and they would just use that. And that's all that's going on. And there is no J in Hebrew, so Jehovah is a very Englishized pronunciation of Yod He Vav He. Oh, thanks, James. Josephus says Yahweh has vowels. I forgot to say this. So the writers of Hebrew later included called vowel points. So when you're reading Hebrew, you read like this, but with the vowel points, you put them underneath and sometimes on top of the consonants. So you read like this. So that's why later they would have vowel points and vowels. So they suspect that the people there knew how to pronounce his name because it's passed down, but they think it's been lost. Yep, that's right. Small letters are usually translated from the Hebrew Adonai, which simply means Lord. All capitals is Yahweh. Exactly correct. So see, he's talking. Chuck is putting stuff in under my name. So it shows Matt Slick. Whoever that Matt Slick guy is really brilliant. Obviously. Who tells great jokes? Sucker people right in there. You sure like that one. You could tell that joke to people. I'll take, a pound of cat fur. If you have any duck feathers, that'd be great, but I'll take a chicken beak. But, I always like a ladder, a rope, Crisco oil, and a tarp. That gets you thinking. If you don't have a tarp, I'll take a compass. What? Okay. The substitutions are fun. If you don't have a tarp, I'll take a plastic cup or a golf ball.
Help that.
Yeah, I do. I need lots of help. The first step. The first step, admitting you need help. Oh, Joanne says he's humble too. All right. Charlie masquerading as you makes you look good. Oh, that's a good one. All right. Okay, anybody else want to say anything? Questions, comments? I didn't eat. Now I'm starting to wake up finally. One of those days. And I'll be up all night. I got a 10:30 meeting tomorrow. You know, our weekly Friday meeting of everybody
Oh, yeah.
all over,
That's right.
from Europe to Africa to South America. Yep. And here. All right. So if anybody you have any questions in the chat room, there's only 14 people in there. And it's all right. How many of you liked the joke I told, the monastery joke? How many of you totally fell into it? And you did.
I could feel the waves coming.
It wasn't making sense, but I'm like, well, he's telling me a story, so.
And then it makes sense. Oh, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Now I get it. So, if Job is the oldest book in the Bible, yes. As far as when was the first book to be penned is Job. And it's Hebrew is even of an older style Hebrew. Okay? Laura had heard it before.
Mhm.
Yes. So Job is the oldest book actually penned, but Genesis, of course, discusses stuff older than what's in the book of Job. And if you go to the book of Job, there's something interesting in the book of Job that a lot of people don't know about. All right.
That's funny.
I'm going to find it. Toward the end of Job. Okay, let's see. Wow. Come on. All right. All right, so what is this? This is in Job 41. I'm going to read something to see what you think it sounds like. This is, I have to skip this because there's a lot here to read. 41:1, can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook, or press his tongue with a cord, or jaw with a hook? Okay. Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? The implication is you can't do this. Strip off his outer armor. Can you come within his double mail? Some people say it's a alligator. You can kill an alligator with spears. You know, open the doors of his face. Around his teeth, there's terror. His strong scales are his pride, shut up as a tight seal. No air can get in. Out of his mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. So some people think what he's discussing here is either a water-based creature that can breathe fire. And people say that's ridiculous. There's a beetle called the bombardier beetle. It mixes chemicals in its abdomen, shoots it out, and fire comes out. So the Chinese is the most ancient unbroken culture that there is, and they have things of dragons. So it looks like something was going from ancient times. I'd also heard, this is hearsay, I read it in an article before I really started collecting all my information for documentation, because it was early on, I was just studying everything and then answering questions at a low level because there was no internet, I wasn't on radio, just my buds and local Bible studies and then a few churches here and there. Anyway, so I read in an article once where some scientists went to, I think it was someplace in Africa, and they talked to some tribes people, I mean, deep in the jungle. And they had a dinosaur book, and they were showing the tribes people this, and they're laughing and being amused. And then they came, I forgot which one it was, turn the page, and they'll go, "Bah, bah, 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 bah," and then they all point out into the same direction out in the jungle. They go, "Bah, bah, bah, bah," like that. So, what does that mean? Like, you need to leave. No, it was, they were, to the interpreter, interpreter said, they have a name for it and they see it out there. But it's not real common. You can't go out and just find it.
Like
They usually
Sasquatch.
find it accidentally. Like Sasquatch. That's right. See, Nephilim, Sasquatch. We could have a little combo going here. Which one would be which? One of us looks like a Sasquatch. A lot of hair. So Job has that, also has the other creature. There's one land-based, one water-based. So what I've also heard is that there are cave drawings of dinosaurs. Yep. If they could prove of a brontosaurus, I think one is a stegosaurus. Stegosaurus. If they could prove that the cave drawing really is ancient and an ancient whatever of a stegosaurus, what are the evolutionists going to do with that? They're going to what they're going to do is just dismiss the information. It doesn't fit their timeline.
They'll just change the timeline.
That's right. James, yeah. It's so. Plus, I could tell you guys stuff if you wanted. I could totally change topics, get my notes on science, and read you stuff. I do it a lot on the internet and read stuff from science, like the human ancestor line problems, abiogenesis problems, missing link problems, polystrate fossils, carbon-12 half-life problems, dating methods that are problematic. There's all kinds of stuff. Oh, yeah. There's lots of them. What?
Yeah, like I said, it's carbon dating. This they can measure, and it's like, but
They can.
to some degree, there's some.
There's a plus and minus factor, but carbon-12 has a half-life of 5,370 or 270. I think it's 5,270 years. Which means that after an organism dies, no more carbon-12 is being input into the system. So that it has a special decay rate, which means after, they said, 93,000 years, there'll be no carbon-12 left in the organism, fossilized or buried in mud or whatever it is. None. So you cannot have any carbon-12 in something that was biological that's over 100,000 years. Except carbon-12 exists in coal shells, which are millions of years old, and diamonds, which are millions of years old. Interesting thing popped on the screen. So those are just some of the problems. And they're finding soft tissue in dinosaur bones now. In fact, a woman scientist is one who came up with that first, I think. And she was talking about it, and they said, no, you're wrong. It can't be. It's impossible. Not because she's a woman, but because it just can't happen. And then other fossils were discovered with it. Yeah. Oops. Oops. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I have lots of information on stuff. One of the things I do is outlines. And I have 20 or 30 outlines I've been working on. And so
I have a question.
Okay.
When the pyramids were built,
I can tell you about that too.
okay,
Yeah.
please do.
The Great Pyramid of Giza, the altitude, taking the whole bit, the capstone's missing, but you take the triangulation up like that, you divide it into the perimeter of the base. The altitude divided the perimeter of the base is pi, 3.1415926. And the faces of each wall, of each thing, due north, due south, due east, due west, and the to the king's chamber. Actually, there's It comes down and then goes up to the king's chamber, the queen's chambers underneath it. That this entrance 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, was to the North Star that was then, and it's shifted because of there's a word for it, the Earth slowly shifting, and so there's that. If there's an earthquake there, it causes the pyramid to get stronger. It's some weird construction. Unless it's too big of a earthquake, but the little shimmers, they say it strengthens it. Plus, the granite or the stone that was used to build it is nowhere near it. They had to transport it from a long way away, and some of them are 30 tons. And they got out of, yeah. I used to
Did the slaves build it, or did Indians come to build it?
slaves.
There we go.
You know, slaves did it, or Nephilim.
Or did they make concrete and build it that way?
No. I saw a really interesting documentary. This guy, he said, "How did these guys in the ancient time get these flat stones so stinking flat? How they do this?" And he had the answer. He said they did a little documentary on what he did. He goes, "So I went out there and I sat down with a bunch of rocks. What would they do? This is how he did it." He goes, takes a rock and he starts chipping with another rock and chipping and chipping. And oh, my ears are just sorry, your hearing aid. So sorry. So he was chipping and he got it flat. Well, what do you do from there? Well, once you got it flat, you took another rock and you did the same things. It was round and then it had this flattish kind of edge. Then you took them and you put them on top of each other and started grinding them. And then he could find the grinding areas. He goes, oh, so he chipped those down. And then he turned the other one and did the same thing, then repeated the process until it was flat. Took him a couple of hours. He goes, you get really good pretty quickly. He said, you don't have to hit this certain thing with this, like that. He said, flat. And he showed it. He did it on camera. It sped up, and you couldn't get a piece of paper in there. And he goes, it was simple. Now they could just amplify the size and do the same kind of a thing and scrape things back and forth. And you could have a block here and a block here and one up on the middle, and you move it here like this, and you could see where to chip down, and then move it back over here, see where to chip down, and go back and forth like that. It's going to grind itself down. Pretty soon you have a pretty. You could put liquids in there. You could do all kinds of stuff. And so it concluded, oh, I could do that. And then how do you move stuff? Well, a documentary where one man raised a 60,000 pound stone by himself. You see how he did it with the rocking? I don't know about that. Yeah. Yeah, they did it. This one guy, he got a lever, lifted up the stone. It was a block. Okay. Lifted it up and put a piece of wood underneath it, and then hammered a piece of wood so that it went underneath. And then he took another piece, did the same thing to the other side. The beginning was tough. And then he had a way of, that's what it was. He got the boards in the middle so that it was pretty much balanced. You could rock it. And then what he did was he'd rock it. He'd walk on one side, rock it, and they put a piece of wood under one thing. Then they could, there's a way to lever it. You go walk back and you take something and you move it. Anyway, I can figure out how exactly it worked, but you watch him and it takes like a couple of days and he could rock this thing up and get it up 10 feet in the air. And then you could move it horizontally into position. Yeah. One guy could do it.
Did it with wind. They used wind.
Wind or wenches? Wind?
Like a kite.
Really? Okay. That's interesting.
You haven't seen that documentary?
No.
It's cool.
Good to see that.
But they've done it different ways on how they moved it.
Yeah.
These big, huge blocks, and it's not the way we think it is.
Hey, you just get out there and start experimenting, start figuring it out. These guys are good Mickey Mousers. They got it figured out, and they just made it work. And
There's a lot of people,
yeah,
so.
and on Easter Island, those big things,
And
the
now
stones
they
up.
think that their bodies are actually, sorry, I
Yeah.
interrupted, but they think the bodies are actually buried underground, that it's not just the head, but
Yeah.
it's a full body. But the bodies are buried.
I've heard that too. So they got a team out there, and they carved a head, and then they figured out how to move it using nothing but ropes. And they tied it up and had teams, and they would rock it back and forth and pull it so that it would rock forward like it was head legs. Yeah. Yeah.
Pivot on one leg, move it.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, there's a documentary on how they could build a Great Pyramid. Back into that by using a circle, not a circle, but a perimeter elevation system. It really was well done. And then you can level it by just putting water in it, and you can see exactly what the length is, and you keep doing that. You can have different things. There's different ways. At any rate, had to be aliens. No, they had ingenuity.
The problem with evolution is the further back in time you get, the less intelligent people are supposed to be. So when you have the pyramids and you go back,
It works against that.
That is totally against what they're saying. So it can't be them who did it, because they're supposed to be stupid back then and have no brains.
Well,
so
they
have to be something else that came and did it for them, because they were Neanderthals.
That's what they say. Yeah. Well, they actually have recently discovered, seriously, a bunch of missing links. Psaki's one of them. Biden's another one. Pelosi.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There's some missing links because well, there are missing links.
Yeah.
I mean, they're leftist wacko commie pinkos.
How did Genesis get written?
Genesis, how to get written? With a pen on paper.
Oh, no, you've been around here way too much. Just gonna say that.
There's something called a colophon, and a colophon is they would have scrolls that the author would write. Moses wrote it, and it looks like he had information and access to other ancient documents, and under the inspiration of God collected the right information and put it together, because he had been trained by God in the desert for 40 years. He knew, because he was 40 years in Egypt. A lot of people think, well, you know what, he's in Egypt for 40 years, so therefore he just dismissed all that. No, I'm sure he learned a great deal of stuff, a great deal, and probably had access to some very ancient stuff. So he probably had studied it and knew it, because he was not dumb. Then he went into the wilderness and was, so to speak, instructed by God. There's this discussion of this. But then, anyway, God finally really actually spoke to him, and we could watch a documentary on that. It's really interesting. They actually think they found the actual place where Moses was. Yeah, a lot of evidence to support it. And so he looks like he just collected the information, knew what the Jewish tradition was, and by God's instruction on the Mount and other things, he put it together and wrote it. And so someone was telling about what called colophons. So if you have, let's say, 20 scrolls, because if you put the writing of a scroll for the book of Moses, a book of Genesis, it might be this big around. Well, let's add all 5 books. How are you going to transport something this big, and how are you going to get a scroll be that long? It doesn't work. Now, that's why they did codexes, because it's a lot easier to manipulate and find information in. Because in a scroll, you had to unwind while you wound, and then move it over, roll, move it over, roll till you found the right place. So what they did was they would get smaller scrolls, they'd break it up in groups, and they did these things called colophons, which are the ending of one scroll line is exactly the same as the beginning of another scroll line, called a colophon. So it's just like a link. It says You read the exact line, and it goes with not that one, that one, that. The scroll has the exact same line, so you know. And they would just, it's one line, but they would have two, but it was one line that was copied, and that was the link. And they would then use that as a means of transporting information and being able to have smaller scrolls and things like that. So it looks like the that Moses had access to all of this, was able to keep it. Plus, there's something that few people know about, called chiastic structures. So a chiastic structure is, for example, ASK happens to work in English really well. ASK, if you ask, it'll be given to you. If you seek, you'll find. If you knock, it'll be open to you. So it's ASK, and then he goes, for he who asks, for he who seeks, for he who knocks. If you ask, if you seek, if you knock, for he who asks, he who seeks, he who knocks. So it's called I think it's called a step chiasm. It goes down and then down, and it's matched. And so they have different kinds of chiasms where you can have a triangle chiasm, where the first statement and the last statement are paralleled. Now, they can be paralleled in that they're teaching the same thing, or they can be paralleled, they're teaching the opposite thing. So the prodigal son, he was lost, the prodigal son is found. It's the same thing, but just opposite. So it's the same thing. And saying, so it was started looking up there, but looking down here, looking left here, looking right there. And you see the pattern coming down. And then in this kind of a chiastic structure, the central point usually is one point, not paralleled on the way back. And so that's the main point of the whole thing. The reason I'm bringing this up is because this is some of the mnemonic devices they would use to recite things and teach things. Once you get, for ASK, it's ASK again. So you got half of it memorized. All you need, you get the other half. And it's easy. So they would do that. And the people who were better at telling stories would rise up, and their brains are better geared for this. They can remember more things. And so I'm sure that Moses had access to all kinds of people who knew all kinds of stories, because they weren't necessarily going to be writing while they're out there in the desert. They're going to be telling stories. And the stories had to be told correctly. So Moses, I'm sure, heard lots of stories about how things worked as he learned 40 years. So 40 years, he learned how great he was in the courts of Pharaoh. 40 years in the desert, learning he was basically nobody. And then 40 years being used by God as nobody. Nice summation of Moses' life.
What's the significance of the wilderness?
Wilderness. I don't like wildernesses.
Okay.
Wilderness is typical of cleansing, when there's nothing there to support you. Moses went into the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days. Paul was in the wilderness for 3 years. It's a time and a place of pruning, of being stripped. So when I talk about this, when people on the radio will ask me, they talk about difficult times. If you're going through a desert time, okay. And in a desert time, you often don't hear from God. It's desert. It's famine. So the illustration I say is that a desert is interesting what it does to you. You walk in the desert with your backpack, with your hat, with your compass, maybe a couple of earbuds. You're walking through the desert, and a couple days into it, okay, you've lost some pounds, and you're in it for a week, and now, okay, let's get rid of the earbuds. The battery's not working. Get rid of that. The can't need that. What you do is the further in you go, the more gets stripped away, and you're left with the bare minimum. And that's what a desert does. It strips you away of all the dependencies of you have of other things and other times. So the only thing left is your dependency on God. And I had a desert experience that lasted for several years. It wasn't I couldn't hear God at all, but it was, I don't hear you. Where are you? Hear nothing. And when I came out of it, it took about 5 years, actually, since we've been here. I wasn't worried. It was just a time of cleansing. And what happened for just me, it's nothing but subjective, but what happened for me was because of what I do for a living, where I study cult theology, I study atheism, I study Islam, I study arguments against Christianity, I mean, I'm in it. I am swimming in the crap. It has an effect on you. And so there was a time, I mean, I'm never going to give up my Lord, but it's like, man, this and that and this and that, and wondering and having to struggle here and there. And I went into this desert time, and I just wasn't hearing much. But long story short, what I came out with was one thing. I went in with a bunch of stuff, so to speak, came out with one thing. It was as simple as this. Do I believe Jesus Christ is God in flesh who died on the cross and rose from the dead 3 days later, or not? Yes. And that was it. I already known that, but there was a time of the imprinting of its severity upon you becomes more real. And that's what happened for me. Yeah. So. Anything else? Anybody else? Class.
Talking about going in the wilderness. I heard, but someone said that not all the people of Egypt went with Moses.
Right. Some stayed.
Like what percentage? I think they said 80-20.
I don't know.
Or something. That do
I never heard that.
I haven't either.
I know that not everybody left, but
I'm sure not. They're comfortable, even though they're slaves.
yep, we will give up all kinds of stuff for comfort. And the left knows it.
There's a reason they were sent out in the wilderness for 40 years. They killed off the generation that was used to being told what to do and under slavery, and brought in the new generation that had to think for themselves and fend for themselves. And
Yeah, that's a
didn't know anything
practical.
about slavery. So it
But-
took away the I need to be cared for people,
Right.
and made them I can stand up for myself people.
Right. Because they had murmured they wanted to go back to Egypt.
Right.
Okay, you want to go back? You're never going to make it where you go. Right. So God, that's what interesting is stuff like that. I said, God, why don't you just change the heart a little bit?
Yeah.
No, I'm going to let your whole bunch of people die out in the desert for 40 years. Well, why don't you just do it the quick way? He doesn't. A lot of times. He does sometimes, but I mean, he changed me like that. But he does this long, laborious process of working through time. And it's like, come on. Moses said only men make coffee. Hebrews.
Hebrews. Ha ha ha.
Hebrews, yeah.
I still think about God knows everything. He's everywhere. Sure,
He knows everything everywhere.
why? He knew that was going to happen.
He knew that Adam and Eve were going to sin. That's right. Why? Why
From
what?
that moment, all this death and pain and I mean, I have my own ideas about that, but
What do you think it is? Why do you think he put it there, knowing what would happen?
a couple of levels.
Give me the one that's not ridiculous.
That knife out my back.
No, come on. What do you got? Let's see.
Well, one thing was that we're here to learn to love,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
I think there's this plan. There's parts of the plan that we don't know about. And I don't know what those are. My mind could go on that, but I'm going to trust God that
Yeah.
there's something
Bigger.
that was going on before we came.
What do you mean before we came along?
Happened.
What do you mean?
Fell.
You mean before Adam and Eve were made? Yeah. Because what you're saying is right. There's a lot of different reasons people come up with. You're right on target. Yeah, and there's others that have been brought up as well. Why would God create a world he knows is where sin's going to enter?
So, wow.
But that also means that he knows people are going to go to hell, and yet he made them. So there's a lot of discussion about that. I've had people say, I would never serve a God that would do that. Okay, don't. You don't do what you want.
Well,
But what?
as parents, you bring children into the world knowing that they're going to disobey you, knowing that they're going to go off and do their own life, knowing that they're potentially going to reject everything you taught them.
Couldn't have God, though, have made Adam and Eve so they wouldn't have sinned?
Of course.
Could he?
Well,
That's the question. Could he have? That's a question. People go, of course he could have.
well,
Maybe not.
why couldn't he?
Well, let's just talk about it for a little bit and just explore some possibilities. So the angels fell. In 1 Timothy 5:17, it says, not 5:17, 5:21, it says the elect angels, the chosen angels. When I read that, I went, oh, I wonder if the elect angels are the ones who were elected not to fall. Does that mean then that they would have if God hadn't elected them? So that to me was a clue of something. So I'm going to go with I think so. I think that's what it means. I'm not saying it is, but I think so. Well, then, wait a minute. Adam and Eve, they blew it. The angels, they blew it, except for the elect angels. That's what it says. Elect angels. So I conclude that any sentient being will fall because they don't possess the quality of God's divine holiness, because that belongs to God alone. And so any creature that is made is going to end up falling because they don't possess that quality that belongs to God alone. That's why I think. Am I right? I don't know. Maybe that's ridiculous. I don't know. But because that's the thing, is we all come up with these ideas. Are they right? Don't know. They're all variations of our ignorance going forth. But here's another clue, because I thought about this over the years. Jesus says, greater love has no man but he lay his life down for his friend, John 15:13. Well, God is love, 1 John 4:8. Could it be that God created the universe knowing that it was necessary that it fall, because the beings don't have divinity in themselves? They're just going to fall. They don't have that inability to fall by God's nature. So they're going to fall. And so he's just going to use that in order to demonstrate the greatest act of love. Maybe that's another reason. And then, like you said, which is really actually the best reason, he has plans, or he has things that we don't know about that are beyond us, and that's okay. So we can speculate on things. Matt, Joanne's husband's snoring. Better do my lost of the day wrap-ups and go to bed. Okay. So it's a good question, though, and a lot of speculations have been given, and we just don't know for sure. Maybe we'll find out when we get to heaven. God will say, "This is why." Oh, you were all so far off. Or maybe he'll say, "Yeah, but you get close, but who knows?" It is a good question. Why would he create people knowing they're going to go to hell? That's serious.
Loves his creation. Made a way for us to be saved out of his love. So what's next? I don't know. Yeah. Maybe there's something beyond that we don't know.
Yeah.
Read.
Well, actually, that answer is a very good answer. In a lot of areas, it's okay to say we don't know. God hasn't revealed it. It's always a sound thing to say, except that when it does say we're ignorant. I mean, to say, look, there are just certain things we just don't know. God doesn't tell us, and that's okay. It's a good place to be. It's a good place to be. And I sit in the radio every now and then and say, I don't know. Good question. God doesn't tell us, or I don't know. God knows, Above my pay, is that what you said? Above my pay grade? Yeah, above my pay grade. Way above my pay
I don't
grade.
even get paid.
I'm sorry?
I don't even get paid, so it's
You don't get paid?
But
Do I?
if she likes
You don't either?
paid.
if she don't get paid, honey.
What?
Joanne, when you say
I
that.
thought that
Oh,
was-
Joanne. Oh, she is on the phone. All right. Matt, Charlie, and Anique for inviting us into your time. Say, sure, James. Tell me about yourself, James. Have you been on here before? I don't know. If you're still on, good night, Joanne. James on here. We're going to wrap it up here because it's been about 2 hours. And instead of doing the study as planning, I ran out of time and energy today. Just too much to do. Didn't have time to prep. So we just did an open Q&A. What?
All right. You're a
To come to Bible study. Wait, is it right now?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Hold on, we gotta turn it around. Okay.
There she is. Hey.
There's Stacia and Rich.
Yeah, you guys have been pretty faithful. You guys are the most faithful ones. Hey, how come you didn't say me? Man. Who's the man?
Richard
She goes to him.
Batman.
She's automatically.
Hi.
Yeah. Nice.
She wished she could say hey to you guys.
Oh.
So
Oh,
there you go.
hey.
Okay, bye.
Okay. Well, anyway, might as well close it up. But anyway, it was kind of interesting. So sometimes people just like to
Yeah.
just what?
Freelance.
Yeah, I like it. I like teaching it. Yeah,
Tangent Bible study.
tangents are fun, and
Yeah.
but I was just so exhausted, and now I'm starting to wake up.
Next question. It's round 2.
Okay, I'm going to shut it down, and then we're going to just blab here. What's that?
She's been up since 3 in the morning.
Oh, well.
You didn't go back to sleep, right?
I was trying, yeah, but
That's a lot
Bye,
of
everybody.
time, really.